Paris is continental Europe's largest city. 12 million people live in this vibrant and congested metropolis, of whom 2 million inhabit the densely packed streets of its central area. Paris became the capital of France over 1,000 years ago, and for centuries it remained a city of narrow thoroughfares and winding roads. The character of the Paris that many visitors know today was created in the second half of the 19th century, when the city's prefect, Baron Haussmann, turned its haphazard medieval alleys into a highly structured city. Haussmann built the famous bridges across the River Seine and erected monumental apartment buildings served by a complex network of underground sewers. He linked the city's districts, or arrondissements, by grand boulevards, the major transport arteries that still keep the city moving today.
The boulevards, the bit without architecture, if you like, the empty spaces in Paris, they're designed really originally as a way of stopping people putting up barricades. Make the boulevard wide enough. It's much harder to put up barricades.
The wide Parisian boulevards might have thwarted the intentions of the 19th century revolutionaries, but they didn't prevent the forces of the Third Reich from seizing Paris in 1940. They occupied the city until its liberation in 1944. Unlike other European capitals, Paris hadn't suffered extensive bombardment, so there was no need for massive reconstruction programs. The majority of post-war architecture originates from a burst of intense activity during the 1970s and 1980s, a period when politicians sought to make bold expressions of the power and exuberance of the French nation.
I suspect the secret truth about France is it still thinks of itself as an empire. They see themselves as, in some way, the kind of the fulcrum around which the whole of the world is balanced. And obviously the centre of all power is Paris itself. So Parisian architecture is designed to reflect that.
The city's first underground railway line opened in 1900. No building in central Paris is more than 500 metres from a metro station, and today the heavily subsidised transport system remains fast and efficient. Paris has managed to make the old and the new function alongside each other. The 19th century Eiffel Tower, the city's tallest structure at 300 metres, was in its day considered shockingly modern, but soon became accepted as one of the city's defining architectural statements. In the 1920s, before Haussmann's design had been finally implemented, one architect devised an even more radical plan. Le Corbusier is the most influential figure in French 20th century architecture, though ironically he never built anything larger than a student hostel in Paris itself. But in 1925, he revealed a plan for the French capital that would inspire a generation of Parisian planners and architects. He proposed the demolition of central Paris, which would be replaced by 18 tower blocks, each 60 stories high. These towers would become home to companies, whose workers would live in other zones connected to the area by a network of underground roads.
The city would be essentially a cluster of high-rise buildings organized around a network of new streets, and in particular a major east-west motorway, and altogether a landscape of reflections upon glass surfaces and no longer the smooth and stony finish of Paris as we still, fortunately enough, know it today. Notre-Dame de Paris, the Louvre, the Opera, the ground would have been totally cleared.
Le Corbusier called it his plan voisin, or neighbourhood plan. It caused a sensation, attracting praise and condemnation in equal measure.
Corbusier was a great artist, but he certainly didn't understand about town planning at that point. You know. Or it would have wiped out a very good city. and what it would have replaced it with is can now be seen in so many Soviet towns. Corbusier's plan for Paris was the pure and undiluted expression of a totalitarian society.
Je l'ai trouvé, c'est certainement un grand génie, mais un être très aigri et désagréable. Mais il y a un côté monomaniaque chez les architectes, c'est certain. En général, c'est une des maladies professionnelles que nous avons. Mais chez Corbusier, c'était très.
Throughout the 1930s, Le Corbusier preached his doctrine of functional zoning. But his plans were deemed too radical, and his vision of a new Paris came to nothing.
The city was very poor and was unable to undertake such major projects. So in a way, the only possibility for Le Corbusier to implement the plan would have been a massive bombing of Paris during World War II, and happily enough, as we know, this never happened.
Although Le Corbusier's plan for the heart of Paris was rejected, his ideas influenced the regeneration of the impoverished suburbs that were in dire need of redevelopment. The district of La Défense, only 4 kilometers west of central Paris, had become a slum area. Today it houses 3,000 major French and international companies. The daring vision of La Défense is popular with those that work there.
Il y a des gens pour qui c'est vraiment une image de modernité. Enfin, même il y a des gens qui habitent là-bas et qui sont très heureux de vivre dans des tours comme ça parce qu'ils ont l'impression, ils sont très fiers, l'impression qu'ils vivent dans la modernité. Moi, en revanche, j'aime bien toujours l'idée de la ville qui se construit sur la ville et non pas l'idée d'une ville neuve qui part de rien. Ces grandes esplanades avec tous ces tours, enfin, il y a un problème d'échelle.
La Défense is an interesting relic of utopian visions of the past, but as a model of how to build towns and how to manage society, I think it's a nightmare. It's a place where you couldn't live.
You already have a cluster of high-rises that have, in a way, preserved the center of Paris. Just imagine this mass of skyscrapers put inside Paris. La Défense has been a very great opportunity to save Paris, to protect Paris townscape from high-rises.
As a residential area, La Défense hasn't fared well. On the Picasso estate stands Émile Ayot's audacious Nuage Towers complex. They've become a dumping ground for some of the city's most intractable social problems.
On les a construits quand il y a eu beaucoup d'immigration. Donc en fait, il y a beaucoup de gens qui sont arrivés. Pénurie de logement, on a fait venir de la main-d'œuvre, donc on a construit beaucoup.
These estates make a mockery of Le Corbusier's vision of workers living in harmony with nature. Instead, clusters of poor immigrant families endure terrible social conditions, a plight largely ignored by metropolitan Paris.
This turned out to be not just a terrible architectural impoverishment, but also created huge social problems. If these were sort of high-income flats like in Miami Beach, they may work. The question is not so much what's the worth of those buildings is, but what they make when they are seen as models of how the whole of society should live.
Sometimes lousy architecture has increased, has added another layer, I would say, of cruelty on the top of other layers. But the real issue in Paris is not the architecture, even when it's derived from Le Corbusier. The issue is social zoning. The issue is the fact of putting together the poorest in some neighborhoods, leading to a deterioration of the living conditions. Please don't shoot the architects.
Central Paris remains a resolutely low-rise city, with a few exceptions. The Montparnasse Tower is one of the centre's few skyscrapers. Completed in 1973, the office block is 210 metres tall and has 59 floors, and it's still the tallest building in France. Even the most innovative of the city's new buildings retain the relatively modest proportions of 19th century Paris. Completed in 1977, the Pompidou Centre, designed by Renzo Piano and Richard Rogers, has an exoskeleton of pipework containing the functional systems that would normally be hidden inside. In a radical design move, giant tubes for air conditioning, water and electricity, as well as escalators in clear plastic tunnels, run along the building's exterior.
Enfin, je pense que bon, c'est vrai qu'en tant qu'architecte, c'est difficile de ne pas l'aimer. Parce que le fait de mettre tout ce qui était, toutes ces tuyaux, toute la tuyauterie, la climatisation, tout ça en apparence, c'était bien évidemment pour gagner de l'espace à l'intérieur.
The inside-out building, I think there's a kind of a joke there. I think there's, it's very witty architecture in Paris. We'll build this building that looks like a factory, but doesn't actually make anything useful. And the most interesting thing about it is the space outside, moreover, hardly anything on the inside at all.
The Pompidou Centre was unique. It had been commissioned by the French President Georges Pompidou to bring art to ordinary people. It was one of the first buildings commissioned to make an overtly political statement about the confidence of modern France. Another statesman who understood the political potential of making bold architectural statements was France's first socialist president, François Mitterrand. Mitterrand came to power in 1981 with a mandate for change. He was keen to present French history in a favourable light.
Mitterrand's reputation is so deeply ambiguous. Worked his way through the Vichy government into resistance, or appeared to be, by the end of the war, a bit of a hero, had constructed a certain status for himself. He exemplifies France in many ways.
Mitterrand used the enormous power of the presidency to transform Paris. He was instrumental in commissioning a series of monumental buildings that have since become a significant part of his legacy.
Il y a eu une série de très grandes opérations qui sont de représentation de la puissance publique et de l'État.
C'est-à-dire qu'en fait, c'est un peu l'histoire de France. Il y avait le roi Soleil, Louis XIV, qui a fait Versailles, François Ier. Un président, quelque part, il a envie de marquer un petit peu son septennat, marqué également par l'architecture, un petit peu de laisser sa trace.
Mitterrand inaugurated a series of ambitious civic buildings by renowned architects, his so-called Grands Projets, or Great Works. He commissioned the architect Paul Chermatoff to create a Ministry of Finance and redesign the Natural History Museum.
Comme client un peu silencieux, remarquablement intelligent, j'ai entendu dire des bêtises à Giscard d'Estaing, j'ai entendu dire des bêtises à un grand nombre de ministres de la Culture. Je n'ai jamais entendu dire une connerie à Mitterrand, parlant de l'architecture qui n'était pas du tout son sujet préféré, c'était la littérature, la politique aussi.
Mitterrand took over the Gare d'Orsay project from former President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. Built in 1900, right in the centre of Paris, the enormous station had no purpose after the demise of steam. The Italian architect Gay Orlenti supervised its transformation into a major museum of modern art. Mitterrand opened it amid great fanfare in 1986, though not everyone was seduced by its charms.
The Gare d'Orsay could have been done a bit more delicately, I think. But it was a great building, and it was much better to restore it, at least maintain its structure, rather than destroy it as Le Corbusier had foreseen it.
On the opposite bank of the Seine stands the world-famous Louvre Museum, which had run out of storage and display space for its vast collections and could no longer cope with the millions of tourists who visited it annually. The American architect I.M. Pei suggested digging out a large section of the central court and capping it with a 22-metre-tall glass pyramid. The model was met with open-mouthed disbelief by Mitterrand's inner circle. Mitterrand responded, "Is there anyone here who finds this disgusting? No? Then it's commissioned."
The Louvre Pyramid, of course, extraordinary we should pay so much attention to it, because it is, after all, only a glorified door. But nevertheless, it is empty, there's nothing in it. The Louvre itself, of course, almost overwhelming in its sheer plenitude. Pyramid, of course, very pleasant antithesis to that. Not only can you see through it, but there's nothing to see in it.
Mitterrand's great works continued. A vast abattoir in northern Paris was transformed into a science park. He built a new opera at the Bastille. And John Nouvel's Arab World Institute combined the sophisticated geometries of the traditional Oriental architecture with the very latest in modern building technology. But Mitterrand's greatest project was Paris's second triumphal arch. Standing in La Défense, it's directly in line with the original Arc de Triomphe. The Great Arch in La Défense was completed in 1989 by the architects Otto von Spreckelsen and Paul Andrew at a cost of 3.4 billion francs. The centre of the arch is a hollow cube, 100 metres in each direction, while on top is a museum that celebrates human brotherhood and the contribution made by immigrants to French culture.
Le symbole de l'Arche de la Défense, c'est quand même le monument du XXe siècle à Paris. Il est très habile parce que il est placé entre le Paris historique et les horizons de la banlieue. Et il s'ouvre des deux côtés.
By 1989, when France celebrated its 200th anniversary as a republic, Mitterrand had changed the skyline forever.
C'était un jouet pas trop cher, ça a coûté quoi? Les grands travaux de Mitterrand ont coûté 15 milliards de francs de l'époque. C'est peu par rapport au budget de la France. Et ça a fait un effet terrible. On ne parlait que de ça.
Most citizens of the country, and not only of Paris, felt rather proud. They felt that these buildings in a way represented them to the outer world.
I think it was particularly political at the end. Mitterrand wanted to make a big show and to have his name attached to some great conceptions.
Mitterrand, qui sait qu'il va mourir, fait la plus grande bibliothèque parce qu'il veut passer à la postérité comme le lettré qu'il était.
Mitterrand didn't live to see through to completion the one project that he held most dear to his heart. Designed by Dominique Perrault, the Great Library contains 400 kilometres of shelving, which hold 12 million books. Mitterrand died in January 1996, 6 months before the official opening of his beloved library. His right-wing successor as Prime Minister, Jacques Chirac, presided over the ceremony.
I think the thing that most people associate with Chirac now is that he's always going on holiday.
Le soleil.
Chirac has yet to make his own mark on the architecture of the capital, but perhaps Chirac's spirit is to be seen in a project initiated by the mayor of Paris.
Of course, most people leave the capital in August and the place is evacuated, but I noticed that in the last couple of years they've started importing the beach into the middle of Paris so that one bank of the Seine bears a remarkable resemblance to Tahiti, with admittedly fake palm trees and coconuts being brought in there. I wonder if that's a sort of Chiracian heritage of some sort, the sense of a city being on holiday, relaxed with itself.
Le soleil.
Whether Chirac intends to leave a more permanent impression on the Parisian skyline remains to be seen. But the people of a city that's always been preoccupied with the pursuit of pleasure seem content to sit back and relax.